Generic foiling tips. Hello and welcome to 10 tips for up-and-coming wingers. Now, I still use most of these today, so sit yourself down and let's see if I've found something that you may have missed. It was said to me some time ago by a very astute and accomplished waterman, namely Rich Broughton, that foiling is the art of doing less. Now, this is a very elegant and very insightful quote, but what does it actually mean? Well, keep you hanging, we'll find out at the end. But for now, let's start with tip number 1. Now, this is a golden rule. Stand in line with your mast. Imagine taping a pole to the bottom of the fuselage where the mast clips in, to your ankles, to your hips, and then your shoulders. One straight line right from the bottom right to the top. And here's a clip of yours truly trying to illustrate the extremes of both. One is miles offline and the other one, well, it looks like I'm on parade. Now, upright is the way forward. Why? Well, it's all down to controlling the roll axis. In this, the ankle, very aptly, is the Achilles heel of your stability. Too far out of alignment, well, you may get moments of stability, but you have little feel of what's going on beneath you. Plus, you're critically short of wiggle room when things get squirrely. The ankle joint is so easily overpowered by the foil that your mass needs to be in line with it. Our windsurfers are the worst at this. They spend their entire lives standing way off the angle of their fin, and it's a really hard habit for them to break. Push your hips forward, shoulders back, to give yourself a nice straight line. If you need to crouch, and when you start pushing harder you will, that center of mass must remain in line. You watch any of the good guys, and this is an immutable cornerstone of the sport. Tip number 2. Now, this rolls on from tip number 1, foot straps. Firstly, I know there's a big strapless community out there, and I do love the freedom of strapless. Plus, many of you will say it's not a good idea to fit straps as it limits your adaptability in moving your feet around further down the career. But if you want an instant ability boost, put your front straps on. Without them, you're relying on a very small angle of deviation from this upright in line with the mast rule. If you go past it, your feet simply peel off the deck. Straps will connect you to the board with a hard connection. Now, that means that if you make a mistake and you come off that line, you can artificially lever yourself back in line with the mast again, something that you cannot do on a bare deck. It allows you to push past the point of no return and recover it. And it also fixes your foot in a predetermined place so you can more accurately monitor changes you make to your foil setup. A word of warning though, don't make them so big that your foot won't roll out of them when you fall. Tip number 3, feet 90 degrees to the center line. When you're about to do something squirrely, twist your front foot as close as you can to 90 degrees. Why? Well, it's leverage over that roll axis again. The back foot is usually 90 degrees anyway, but if you can twist your front foot to match, you can more aggressively control that roll axis, which is always the first axis to get out of shape and skew you off balance. Tip number 4, get your front foot pressure dialed in. Now, the premise on this is set your kit up so that it has the right front foot pressure, not too much and not too little. If you ask any higher level winger what foot pressure they prefer, they will on average say a light pressure on the front foot is preferable. Why? Well, the pitch stability is most accurately modulated through one direction of pressure only, namely how much you push on your front leg. If you ride with neutral pressure between front and back leg, you're going to have to shift your weight between front and back legs to modulate that pitch, and that's going to cause delays, oscillations, and ultimately a loss of control. Getting this right, I humbly believe, is absolutely critical. Too much bias on the front and you'll lose sensitivity. too little and you don't have that constant pushback that you need to precisely modulate it. Set it right and it can transform a session from a fight to a feeling of complete invincibility. Plus, every session is different and needs this aspect fine-tuning in. How to set it? Well, one is to alter the distance between the mast and the front foot, effectively altering the leverage over the foil. The other way, and the way I've been doing it for years, is to alter the stab size or the angle of the stab. Now, my foils have a stab that's set on a slider that can be micro-adjusted when on the water, and this is it here. And this is me adjusting it on the water. But most manufacturers make their own shims, or failing that, you can buy washers, shim washers on eBay. Now, if you raise the back of the stab, the front foot pressure increases. If you raise the front of the stab, the front foot pressure decreases. And there are so many variables in this, from the conditions, your general riding speed, to the myriad of different kit combinations you can create. They all screw around with this balance, and I think it's critical to spend time learning to feel for this balance and learning how to adjust your kit to get it right for you on any given day. Tip number 5, let the foil move around. Now, when I first started getting stable runs, I was obsessed with the notion that to keep that stability, I had to be as still as possible myself. For if I don't move, nothing else is going to move either, right? Well, it turns out that did me no favors at all. And the only way to get genuine stability is to hand control of it to the autonomic side of your brain. To lock that in, I suggest that you intentionally move the foil around underneath you. Provoke it, recover it, play with it. All the time you do this, your brain is learning, and much like riding a bike, it will quickly become second nature. Tip number 6, initiate the move, then lead with the wing and let the body and board follow. Now, this one is most relevant to tacks, but if you commit to the move by throwing the wing, your head, shoulders and everything else will follow. Here's a clip of exactly that. Watch the initiation, then the wing is thrown, and everything else follows as you chase down that new hand position. Tip number 7, get a friend to video. Now, most of us are visual learners, and if you are not, you still need to see your work in real life. It's a very important way for you to critique what you're doing. What you think you're doing and what you're actually doing, well, it's not always the same thing. You'll learn a ton from watching yourself. Body position, speed of entry, and also where things start going wrong on the moves that you don't make. You'll have watched a ton of videos online already, so see how yours compares. Tip number 8, speed. Once you get the fundamentals, pay attention to your speed. Why? Well, here's the thing. Transitions use glide, and how long you glide for is the difference between your entry speed and your stall speed. So the faster you go in, the more time you get. Upwind transitions kill your speed really fast, as the wing and you, well, they cause a ton of drag. Going in faster gets around this. Now, I use a Garmin watch to record all my sessions, and looking at the speed graph is really interesting. So find your top speed and practice accelerating to it and getting comfortable with it. Here's a clip here of me finding the top end of an 800 a year or so ago. Something I do now with every foil that I get, so I know exactly where I'm at. Now, I'm not saying ride around with your hair on fire all the time, but a few seconds of controlled acceleration pre-transition, it can make everything a lot easier. And it's why smaller foils can be just as practical as big foils. That is, when you get the confidence to push. Tip number 9, don't play it too safe with board sizes. Now, over the years, we've learned 2 important lessons. First, big boards are heavy, with a ton of mass out in front of the foil. This makes pitch control imprecise. It's much easier, in fact, to ride a small board once you're up. Secondly, too much width kills early starting. Think a big fat old school 140 board goes before a skinny 65? It's not so. Personally, I think the big traditional boards are going to be entirely killed off by these new multi-use downwind things like the AK Nomad. They're hugely efficient off the foil and really balanced when on. Also, as a cornerstone of wingboard size, when I look at all the good riders around me, I see them going up and down the board sizes. Most of them settle on 25% less than their body weight in kilos. So, for example, I'm 80 kilos and my sweet spot is around 60 litres. As for getting going on boards that sink, if you have interest, have a look at this video up here. Now, we did this a year or so ago, and variations of this technique make starting small boards really easy. So much so, it's no longer the roadblock it once was. In fact, the issue of getting small boards going and getting to your feet on them is no longer really talked about at all. Tip 10, the last tip and the explanation to that quote. Foiling is the art of doing less. In this, when you get it right, it'll dawn on you that what you've been trying to do has been achieved by doing, in reality, very little. And the upshot of this is that foiling is a very cerebral sport. You don't need to do a lot or do it hard, you just have to do it right. Furthermore, no amount of force is going to help. It's 99% brain power. It is the art of doing less, but thinking more. So when you fail, and remember, we all do it constantly, remember to push past the frustration and think about what's just happened as fast as possible. Break it down, find out where it started to come unstuck, and look for a solution. If you take that solution too far, dial it back and keep experimenting until you pull it off. The key is in the mind, definitely not in the gym. When you get it right, keep repeating that success and it will hardwire itself into your muscle memory. Now, lastly, this is not a tip, but do give yourself a break. You know, it's not easy, this foiling lark. And just because you've had 3 good sessions in a row absolutely doesn't mean that the 4th one's in the bag. Now, I remember last year just peeking over the dunes. I saw the best waves of the year, perfect wind, and promptly spent the next 2 hours getting absolutely schooled. Now, I'd have swapped my kit for a bag of chips, but obsessing about it in the days and weeks since, the truth is that day taught me so much. And if you're not falling, you're not growing. And learning to fall is something that this sport teaches us all too well. So I hope bits of this have struck a chord. And if you have any comments, please feel free to leave them below. Lastly, here's to a good year, and remember, some days you win and some days you learn.